Well, hello there and welcome to Cinema Recap. Glad to have you here. Thanks for joining us. So today we're going to check out something called The Great Train Robbery, and it's a film in two parts. We're going to focus on the first part. Attacked a train and got away with more than 2.6 million pounds. Spoilers ahead. Our story begins on the 27th of November, 1962. A man is sitting at the back of a car reading a paper. He looks over the top. A plane passes overhead. Three men in black suits wearing bowler hats and carrying umbrellas enter the building. They enter the gentlemen's toilets, where there's two men already there dressed in a similar way. They're acting all very suspicious and looking around. When the time's right, all five men leave the toilets together. One of them sees vehicles approaching from outside before joining the others in the elevator. They head to the ground floor. The vehicles stop outside the building, and the man in the car with the newspaper continues to watch from outside. In the elevator, the five men pull balaclavas over their faces, while the guy in the car outside does the same, completing that look by putting his bowler hat back on. The man steps out of the car, also carrying an umbrella, while one of the vehicles that pulled up to the building is being unloaded of its goods, which is a metal box, upon which is written the word H. Kitchen. As the man enters the building carrying that box, the five bowler hats step out and begin attacking that dude and the others nearby, using their umbrellas, which are hiding metal rods. The man who stepped out of the car enters calmly, seeing the mayhem. The two silver cars that were there waiting quickly reverse towards the building, and one of them is loaded with the box while the others act as a decoy. The cars make a quick getaway and manage to escape. Upon opening the box later, now in a secret location,
What we got now?
one of the men comments, "That don't look like 400 grand. They count it and find that it's only 62 grand. Minus other costs, each man gets about 4 grand each. So they're complaining about this amount, saying how all the planning has gone to waste. And the guy who's counting the money, the leader, Bruce, says that they'll do better next time. One of the men still isn't happy, going on complaining about these expenses, and the two men begin to argue amongst themselves. Later on, the men go out and have a good time, posing for a picture before continuing food, drinks, and music. Now once the song is over, two of the men, Charlie and Bruce, talk. Bruce tells Charlie that he's hungry for the next job, but Charlie says that they gotta lie low for a bit and let things cool off. Bruce goes on by saying they need to make it bigger, eager to pull in more money next time. The next song starts up and people continue to dance, having a good time. Bruce goes off to the toilet and briefly talks to a man who mentions an airport raid, going on to say that the men responsible barely got away with loose change, referring to the 60 grand stolen. The man says the robbers must have felt sick when they opened that box, which they did. Bruce implies that it wasn't bad for 20 minutes work and walks away. The man follows him. The man goes on to say that will be on him like a shadow and introduces himself as Frank, a detective.
Stay in your box.
He tells Bruce to stay in his box before leaving. The men are then offered another job and given details as they walk through a park. Their target is an overnight mail train traveling from Glasgow to London. They're then told more specifics about the train and learn that there may be as much as 1 million on board, maybe more. Bruce sees green as he watches the bags being taken off the train. The men walk through the train station and talk more about the heist. There are no transport police or security guards protecting this train. Well, you're just asking to be robbed. They continue talking and go on to say that there will be 75 men on board this train, but only 5 on the high-value package coach. They plan to steal the money without the men on board noticing.
We ain't got the expertise.
Bruce is taken with the idea, saying it's about getting the life you deserve, before one of the other men insults Potatoes. Hey, you leave Potatoes out of this. Later, the 4 men begin to make their plan. Charlie says that they don't have the expertise. Bruce counteracts that by saying if they can't do something, they need to find somebody who can. One of the men mentions a florist in Brighton, and so they go to visit this guy and speak to 2 men, Tommy and Roger. They ask him if he knows how to stop a train on a track. They agree to stop the train, as long as they can be part of the job and get a good cut of that reward. Bruce and Charlie talk about it later, with Bruce saying that there's enough money to go around. Charlie replies that the more people in on it, the more chance of them getting caught. Bruce argues that they'll need extra hands to get the bags of money off the train, and without Roger, they can't stop that train in the first place. So Bruce ends by asking for a vote, and they agree and meet with Tommy and Roger in their home later.
Thank you, Charlie.
They talk about this plan and find a good place to remove the bags from the train, a place that is secluded with no houses around. Bruce visits the tracks with Roger, and they survey the area.
But you have to move it forward to the bridge.
That night they're still there, looking out for the train and keeping track of exactly when it passes. The train is exactly on time. They talk more about the signals and play around with the lights. Bruce is surprised by how easy it is to change these lights. Now Bruce talks to his buddies later, admitting that he has a problem. The train needs to be stopped at the bridge, but the carriage carrying the bags of money needs to continue on further. Bruce told Roger he could do this, wanting to look like he knew what he was doing. Now he has to work out how.
Would you mind if we took a look around?
They decide to buy a farmhouse located near the tracks where they plan to stop the train, using the location as a base. And by buy the farmhouse, I mean they'll secure a deposit for the place, and once they have the money, they'll burn that down and escape. Bruce is handed a children's book on how to ride a train. A children's book with pictures. Yeah, I get it. Earlier, Roger said something about simplicity. Well, I guess if it works. The two sneak on the train with the book and teach themselves how to drive it. They manage to get the train driving and move the carriage forwards, leaving the station altogether. They did manage to make that train go, but can't find the brakes. His friend straight jumps off the train and Bruce calls him a bastard before jumping after him, but they land safely in the snow. Later on, they talk more about their plan. If they can't drive the train themselves and can't find a better driver, they'll have to find a way to persuade the train driver to work for them. They begin to argue amongst themselves and Bruce storms out for a smoke. Bruce meets up with a friend, telling him that one of his guys, who's part of the train job he's planning, got pulled by the law. His friend tells him that he wants to help, saying that he can't drive a train himself, but he knows someone who can. And so, Alf is introduced to the plan. The men meet up and Bruce goes through the new plan. They'll disguise themselves as army soldiers.
Those alarms go off?
But won't have any guns because they're there only for the money. They don't plan on hurting anyone, just want the cash. And they'll have 15 minutes to unload that cash. And then we'll lay low in the farmhouse. Once everything's planned out, Bruce tells them to go home and that they'll meet at the farm on the agreed date to begin work. On this date, they roll up to that farmhouse and begin setting up. Outside, they have plenty of space for all their vehicles. They get into the house and dress in overalls, pretending to be decorators. There's a knock at the door. A man introduces himself.
Who's the owner then?
He owns the next farm over and asks Bruce if he's the new owner. Bruce says he's just a decorator and that the owner will be back in a fortnight. That man nods and leaves. Wait, why does he have a gun? Also, he just saw Bruce's face. That's not going well. That night, the guys hang out at the farmhouse, playing games and keeping themselves occupied. Bruce is pestered about the time, and one of them worries if the man they saw earlier will come back, saying he hates waiting. The guy that appears says it's off for tonight, and they'll have to wait tomorrow. Hours are passing, and the guys live in uncomfortable proximity to one another. The money is loaded onto the train, and back at the farmhouse, the guys are told, it's on. The heist will happen tonight. Everyone gets ready. Disguised as soldiers, they drive to meet the train. They park by the bridge and get ready. The train makes a stop at Crew Station, and more money's loaded on. The guys continue to play with the lights, waiting around for the train. It's 2:50 a.m., and Bruce is in position. They wait just a little longer, staring down the tracks in the direction it'll come in. After a tense few moments, they see lights. This is it. The conductor sees the yellow signal and puts the brakes on. The train comes to a stop right by the bridge as the men wait behind a wall. It's 3:03 a.m. One of the men on the train gets out to use the phone by the tracks, though is unable to connect to anyone. That wasn't part of the plan, so the guys now have to improvise. He's jumped and held to the floor, ordered to stay silent. The remaining man is pulled out of the train and the replacement driver gets in. He can't leave immediately, however, as there's no pressure in the train, as they must have lost pressure when they uncoupled it. The guys pressure him, but he can't get it moving. They pull back the original driver and order him to move the train, but he can't for the same reason. There's no pressure. Something about a vacuum? I don't know how trains work. After a tense few moments, the train begins to move, leaving the other carriages behind. That train reaches the bridge and is stopped. It's 3:15 a.m. The conductors pull from the train and offered some money for keeping his mouth shut. He refuses.
No.
And is dragged away. The men get into the carriage, ordering those inside to get on the ground. The padlock holding the money behind the gate is broken, and the money is taken off the train. The bags are passed down the line into waiting vehicles. They don't have time to grab all the bags, so some are left behind.
There's only a few left!
And the men escape. They head back to the farmhouse, and Bruce warns them to keep an eye on homing devices, reminding them to keep their gloves on. They hear a report on the radio about him, and they begin laughing and celebrating. The money is emptied into a big pile and counted. Everyone is thrilled. Bruce says to wake him up when they finished counting. Another man replies that it's going to take a while. He answers, the longer the better. Bruce later wakes up and goes downstairs, and he's told the total amount of cash stolen, an amount of over $2.5 million. That's a lot of money.
Shut up!
Bruce is told it's all over the radio, and that it was reported that only $100,000 was taken. Bruce is worried, however, and says to himself that it's too much. Later on, some men play Monopoly with real money. They're relaxing, having a good time, and the train conductor is given 20 grand. Some of the men talk about what they're going to do with the money. All have big dreams. Bruce tells them to be quiet, hearing something on the radio. It's known that the robbers used army vehicles in the robbery, and that an eyewitness saw the vehicles at around 4 a.m. that morning while walking down a back road. Oh, you mean the guy who owned the next farm over? They realize they can't use the vehicles now, but continue with their original plan to stay at the farmhouse for a week. Bruce says that the authorities will be kept busy for a while with real military vehicles in the area, and that they still have time. He says they'll split the money and get rid of any signs that they were ever at the farmhouse by burning it once they're done. Bruce heads out, still listening to the radio, and sees some of the guys outside painting the vehicle a different color to make it look like a brick van. Bruce hears on the radio that the police have asked residents local to the area where the train was robbed to remain vigilant, as it's believed that the robbers are hiding out within a 30-mile radius of the bridge. Oops. And that farms in the area are being investigated. These boys are getting restless, and Bruce insists that they stay where they are. He tells them that it's just the eye of the storm, and that they need to keep their nerve. Under pressure, Bruce admits that he didn't expect so much money, and that this wasn't supposed to be the crime of the century. Charlie's insisting that they leave tomorrow. Bruce stays silent. The guys begin to clean the house of evidence, burning their costumes or uniforms, and Bruce sadly throws his hat in the fire. Now the next day, just before they leave, Charlie gives them all a warning to not flash their cash around, and if the police come around, to keep their mouths shut.
It's a thing of beauty.
Everyone gets in their cars and makes a quick getaway. Bruce is the last to leave. It's now the 9th of August at 6:30, and Bruce returns home to a worried wife. She hugs him, asks him what he's done, having heard the radio. He orders her to escape with her son, and only reluctantly does she agree. The guys begin to worry. The heat still hasn't died down. Everyone is tense. And upon learning that the farmhouse has not been burned down yet, Charlie begins to beat that man up. He's ordered to go before they kill him, and so he does. Bruce asks how thorough the clean was, and learns it wasn't thorough enough. They plan to go back to the farmhouse and burn it down themselves, but they're too late. The farmhouse is already being searched. Bruce hears on the radio that the cops are certain arrests will follow soon. He's remembering better times with his wife, as his wife watches him through the doorway. Charlie's saying they should continue with their plan to burn that farmhouse, but Bruce says it's no good, and that the place will be crawling with cops.
What do you suggest?
Going on to say that he's out of plans. Bruce checks out the front page of the paper, seeing the first of their men has fallen, now in the hands of authority. Charlie proposes going separate ways, no contact, far apart and far away. Not long after, Bruce sees his face on the front page, now a wanted man. Wearing a disguise, he walks away. For a little context, that 2.6 mil they stole is worth around 41 million pounds today, or over $53 million. Thanks for chilling with us on part 1. It's a story inspired by the book Signal Red by Rob Ryan, with research material from the book The Great Train Robbery. The untold story from the closed investigation files are by Andrew Cook. Bruce Reynolds is played by Luke Evans, that same guy that's in The Hobbit, you know, the one who kills the dragon. It was also released as a TV miniseries in 2013. Stick around for part 2 at some point. Till next time.